Welcome everybody to our Birmingham Museum artifact short. I'm Donna Cassiselli, and the artifact that I picked for this short is a daguerreotype photo in this beautiful case here. Now, I actually took a bigger, scanned it so that you can see the full thing, and it will be in the comments when the live is done. Now, the reason why I chose this photo, we actually have hundreds and thousands of photos in our collections, and we get them all the time, and we love getting photos. Photos can tell some wonderful stories, but they have to be scanned, stabilized, preserved, put in archival boxes, and so this can take some time, and sometimes photos have to wait their turn. And it's harder when the photos are not marked. Luckily, this photo was marked, and on the back with a piece of paper it was written Polly Blakesley Masters and her mother Amy Eldora Durfee, Mrs. Scriba Blakesley. Now this intrigued me because we had the Blakesley family history handwritten by Marion Blakesley, who lived in the late 19th, early 20th century. And there was no mention whatsoever of any Amy Blakesley married to Scriba. We knew Scriba was married to Thankful. They had 3 children only. Several died in infancy, but they only had 3 survive. George Blakesley would go on to become a very famous Birminghamer and well known in Detroit and even the state legislature. So who was this Polly? Who was this Amy? This is kind of the question. And what's interesting is right in the middle of the Blakesley family burial plot in Greenwood is a woman named Amy Oatman. We know she was buried there, but that's all we know. She doesn't even have a headstone. So we don't know when she was born or when she died. So who is this Amy Oatman and who is this Amy Blakesley? So we kind of think that the Blakesley family in the first line, George's and Eli's line, kind of were hiding Amy because Marion Blakesley wrote out the family history, and she took a lot of it from this book called The Biographical of Oakland County, written in 1891. When I found this photograph and I found the back of this photograph, I was like, okay, I got to start looking this up. So I'm reading Marion Blakesley's accounts, and I'm like, who's Amy? So I did some research online and found this book. This is where she got most of her information from. And at the very bottom, on one line, under a correction, it just says that evidently Scriba had a second wife, Amy, and had again?
No, just pick up where you left off about 2 minutes ago. Sorry, we had a temporary termination of our Facebook Live, which we don't understand, but we're trying to pick up where we left off.
So I'm not quite sure where I left off.
You were talking about Oatman in the 1860s?
Oh, yes. Okay, so in the 1860 census, it turns out that Polly, who's only 15, is married to a Martin Masters and already has a 6-month-old son. So this is kind of scandalous too. We have a runaway bride, and now we have Polly Blakesley married at 15 with a child. And she's living with an Amy Oatman, which is interesting because this is the same woman probably buried in the cemetery. Now, when we look at the land where Amy Oatman is, if we look at the censuses, I know you can't see these very well, but if you look at the censuses, you can see exactly where a person lives based on who their neighbors are, because the census taker back then, they went from door to door to door to door. So you know that they probably went in order. You're not going to bounce around from one corner of the city to the other. And when we look at the Bloomfield map, I know that this is impossible to see, but if we look at the Bloomfield map, you can see that an Ira Oatman is right next to Alex Duncan and George Blakesley again, and a couple other people that we were able to find right on the census with Amy Oatman.
And what year was that map?
This map was 1857. So in 1860, we can find all the same people on the map. So I yellowed it to those of the census, and Amy Oatman and her daughter Polly and her son-in-law Martin and the baby are all on the same census in the right spot of Ira Oatman's land. So it looks like Amy Blakesley married Ira Oatman. Now what makes it more intriguing is that we go back to the CMU, Digital Michigan Newspapers. Thank you very much. You are much appreciated. When Ira Oatman died in 1858, Mrs. Ira Oatman was working with George Blakesley, Amy Blakesley's stepson, to resolve the property, the sales of homes that were owned by Ira, and to settle all the probate. So it's just quite interesting. We also have in Century Houses through the Bloomfield Township Public Library that Ira Oatman had 80 acres and that he died in 1858, but the land was purchased in 1857 and would become the Beatty Farm by about 1870 to 72. And that's why I was able to figure out that, yes, Amy Oatman married Ira Oatman. And if Amy Oatman was the relative of Polly Blakesley Masters and that they were living with her, Amy Oatman is probably most likely Amy Blakesley. Again, I still can't find any marriage records, which is